Welcoming you to a life of awareness, the Presence Project is excited for you to join us for today's podcast with your host, Paul Kersner.
Hello and welcome to episode 81 of Are You Being Present? My name is Paul. I want to welcome you to the present moment. I want to welcome you to the here and now. And I want to thank you wholeheartedly, sincerely, and deeply for joining me in this lovely, perfect, amazing, precious present moment. The title and topic for today's podcast is, How Can I Stop Thinking So Much in the Present Moment? This is a question that I am asked often when I first introduce presence to the patients that I work with. It's a question that I've thought about many times over the past 15, 20 years of my own personal journey with mindfulness and presence. And I think it's a question that many people raise when they first start their journey and have the awareness that they are thinking so much. Thought, and especially the way that it's taking place right now, is almost like an addiction. We're addicted to thinking. We've assumed that that's just a normal state of being, endless streams of thought. And it's not. But within this societal framework, within the programming that we're raised with, thinking is the norm. Thinking all the time is the norm. Thinking too much is the norm. And how can there ever be any peace if all we do is constantly think? A mind that constantly wanders, leaves the present moment. A mind that is obsessed with worry and anxiousness, fear. That is what your thoughts are dominated by. All of ours. Very rarely do we enter into a space of no thought. I remember in my mid-20s the first time I stopped thinking. And it was very briefly, but it was blissful because it was the first time in my life that I was able to sit and have no thought in my mind, in my head. And I can remember it very well, actually, because it really stood out, and it was so antithetical to everything that I knew, everything that I thought was possible. And I was very surprised to see what it felt like, what it was like, what that state of being was like. And it only lasted a few seconds, but that was enough to catch my attention, to make me believe that if I continue to do my work, whatever that may be, that I can start to slowly expand those moments, that there would be more moments that I could be with no thought. So it's not a matter of trying to stop your thoughts. It's a matter of understanding that there's work to be done to start slowing them down, to work towards a place where you can possibly enter into no thought. But please understand that it's not possible to stop thinking all the time. There is purposeful thinking. There are times where thought is extremely useful, but it is not all the time. When I first start working with patients, and more specifically when I first start my mentorships, the first thing we do is we work and gain a state of observation. That's a very important step. It's a very vital step. It's a step in a place that needs to be honed in on, because when you're the observer, you start to really see what's been going on, and that's when you ask a question like, how can I stop thinking? Or how can I slow my thought down? Or why do I think so much? It becomes glaringly obvious that thought is an issue, is a challenge, and might be perceived as a problem because it's endless. The streams never stop. It goes from one thought to the next to the next. And again, if you didn't know any better, you would think that this is a normal way of being until you sit down and you start doing the work, or someone explains to you and says, look, there's a different way to be. It's possible if you do the work. But the way that we're raised, indoctrinated into society within this matrix, is that thinking, obsessive thought, is the norm. And were never properly given the tools to learn how to slow and potentially stop thought. But again, I want to stress that it's not possible to not think all the time. There are expanses where I've been able to achieve no thought, and they're lengthy, but they come to an end. There's a beginning, middle, and end, and I honor that, because when we're living with presence, we understand that the impermanence that exists. So a state of no thought is led by impermanence, by the understanding that it's not going to last. And when I enter into states of thought, when I watch my mind, I understand that if I do my work, that's impermanent as well. I have lived in a state of being of constant thought and worry and fear, and I understand full well what that's like. It's exhausting. It is exhausting to live with an unguarded ego that constantly is searching for problems and creating problems and creating these solutions for problems that aren't even problems. It never ends, and that ego will also search through the treasure trove of your memories and cherry pick things to make you ruminate about, to make you think about, to make you regret. And it will completely steal your presence. It will pollute your present moments. That's why ego work is so quintessential to learning how to slow one's mind down to be able to maintain a state of presence. The ego is always at the heart of the challenge of being present, because until you do a lot of ego work, your ego is going to constantly run amok and create all kinds of chaos. And that ego work requires discipline. It requires a presence or a mindfulness practice, but it takes an awareness of what the ego is, what that loud voice is, what it's doing to you, and how much it's making you think, worry, ruminate, what emotions that it's triggering for you in any given moment. It's not normal, and it shouldn't be considered normal to always be thinking. And I can't stress that enough. And I wanted to take time with this podcast to illuminate the fact that thought has almost become like an addiction. We're addicted to thinking, even though we don't even know it at times. The thinking starts in the morning and it ends in the evening. And very rarely do we have a moment of reprieve. And a lot of people will do things to calm their minds as a form of self-medication. And it's usually things that have side effects, activities that can just distract us. The problem is that these distractions, these self-medications or medications, in fact, they never last. So the thought is still there. The ego is still there. The work is all still there. And when that distraction or that numbing dies down or ends, all the thoughts rush forward. And it's almost like a wave of thought, a wave of emotion. And it's very challenging because then you feel like you're stuck in a cycle, an endless loop. And that's when the ego really thrives, because you feel like it's never going to end. That one moment is worse than the next and the next. And it's always been like this, and it's always going to be like this. So when I'm asked a question like, how can I stop thinking so much? My first suggestion is, well, have you spent the time in isolation or by yourself, with yourself, however you want to word it, in a state of observation, to watch really what's going on in your head, to see the thoughts for what they are, to start to create that gap between the thought and the reaction, because the ego loves the reaction. And I put together a podcast about the difference between response and reaction. And the more time you spend observing the ego, the more ability you have to pause and not react, and finally respond when everything has settled down, when there's not thought which is triggering emotion, causing you into a state of chaos. So that initial state of observation is the first step towards getting to a place where you can think less. It's not the step that's going to get you to stop thinking. There are a lot of tools that are helpful to calm your mind and sometimes to distract you, but in a very mindful way. And, guided meditations are really a wonderful tool. And I oftentimes play them for my patients on the acupuncture table because it's better than a patient laying there just thinking for 28 minutes. That's not helpful at all, and that just keeps that sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight state, engaged the entire time. And that's antithetical to what we're trying to achieve here, which is a deeper state of healing and peace. So guided meditations are wonderful tools. And I think that when you're first starting your journey of presence, a tool like guided meditation is helpful, because just trying to meditate, it can be extremely challenging and frustrating, leading you to a place where you feel like it doesn't work. It's impossible to just sit still, and then you just give up. And of course, who thrives when you just give up? Your ego, because you've just enabled it. You've just created a self-fulfilling prophecy, and now you're back to where you started from. I say all these things objectively because I understand full well what it was like to be dominated by thought. And it was horrible. It was terrible. It was exhausting. It was frustrating. It was sad. And I lived it for a large part of my reality. And it is only due to my dedication to working on myself every day without stop that I've been able to enter into states where I feel more peace than not, where I feel less thought than not, where I'm not dominated by my thoughts. When the thoughts appear, I'm able to see them for what they are and use my tools to calm myself, to create that gap so that I'm not in a state of reaction. And if I do react, at least I can calm myself and pivot. So, and I've talked about the ability to pivot, and I've talked about all these things in prior podcasts. But when you ask a question like, how can I stop thinking? I would tell you that I would try to reframe that question for you and say, how can you start to think less? Because trying to get from thinking too much to try to get to the place where no thought is a very large journey. It's a very lengthy journey. It's a very long journey. And it's not that it's impossible. It is possible. But there are steps that need to be taken. And there's time and dedication that needs to be made, a commitment to oneself, to getting to a place where you can experience no thought. But again, like I remember the first time it happened to me, and how amazing it felt, and how I never thought that would have been possible. And it really is an honor to be able to share that with you, because it was life-changing. Really shifted my trajectory and my belief in what I thought was possible, because up until that point in my life, I believed that that's just the way it was. I was just going to be thinking all the time. I was going to be dominated by thought. And it's not to say after that point that I was able to keep on widening the amount of time that I had no thought. It would come and go. And I understood that was part of the process. I didn't hold on to it too tightly. Because doing your work, when you start doing your ego work, oftentimes the chatter increases because you become more aware of it. But like anything else, when especially when we're dealing with the ego and presence, it's not going to last. So if you can endure the increase in chatter with your ego work, you can get to a place where it'll finally start to quiet down. It doesn't mean it's going to go away, but it means that you're more capable of handling it when it does show up, and that you can find a way to ground into the present moment where there is less thought. So there's no definitive answer for you to say, well, just do this, this, and this, and you'll stop thinking. I think that if I were to give you that answer, it would not be fair, because it's a subjective journey to get to a place where you can think less. I think living in the third dimension, having an ego, which we all have, means that it's something that's a part of your personality that you're going to be contending with, that you're going to be working with for your entire time on Earth. So it's all about recalibrating your relationship with the ego. I don't believe that you can destroy your ego. I think you can change the relationship with your ego, where your ego is not as dominant, where it's not as loud, where there's more peace within your mind, where you live in a more peaceful state of being. But this reality has challenges, and oftentimes those challenges happen in multiples. I usually see my challenges come in threes. And that usually leads to my nervous system getting triggered. And when my nervous system gets triggered, that's when my ego shows up. That's when, again, I'm asked to be present. I have to use a variety of presence tools. I have to get into a state of observation to build that gap out so that I don't act out or I don't act through the emotions that I'm feeling, the wave of emotional reaction. It's a challenge, my friends, and I understand that this journey is not easy. It's not meant to be easy, and I wish that I can give you a real quick answer to tell you how to stop thinking. But what I would suggest is building out your presence practice, creating a toolbox that has all these different tools, different methodologies that you can use when you notice that you're thinking more or too much. And little by little, as you do your work, as you continue down the path, you'll get to a place where you think less and less and less, where your more normative state of being is peace and quiet within. And I do have the ability now to sit or be in a place and have no thought. But again, it's not like it's all the time. I'm a human being that has an ego, and my ego loves to chatter like everyone else's ego. And it's just the fact is that I've done a lot of work on presence. I talk about it often. I use my tools every day, and I have a level of awareness that I've developed and built over the course of many, many years that allows me to think less and at times have no thought. So I hope that this podcast was helpful in a sense to reframe and refine the question, to make you understand that there's no simple or easy way out. And there really shouldn't be, because presence is something that you earn, that you develop, that you engender. And there's no endpoint where you're just present. There's no endpoint where you just have no thought. An analogy I like to share with patients is that even the monks who sit on a hill still think. They meditate, for hours upon hours during the day, but they're still thought. They're still humans. They still have ego. They're just more dedicated to working with themselves, being in a deep state of observation and a meditative state. They just live without societal pressure and constraints, but they're human beings like everyone else. So many of the things that you contend with, they contend with. They just are in a greater state of isolation with less stimulus. I do hope that a podcast like this is helpful, and that my personal experiences that I share at times are relevant to what you're going through. I understand that the journey is challenging, and my work, the work that I share, is intended to make it a little easier, to soften the edges, to make your journey a little bit more pleasant and present. I do consider it an honor and a privilege to be able to help you understand that you're not alone, and to give you these presence tools that I hope that you use to live a life that's more peaceful.
Thank you for listening to the Are You Being Present podcast, brought to you by the Presence Projects. Remember, you have a choice. Choose to be present.